Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney, and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 3 years, I've interviewed over 200 people around this question, not to prescribe you a universal answer, but to help you to find and define your own answer to this question. I'm hoping the guests' explorations, musings, curiosities, and experiences will prompt your own reflection on what this question means to you. While I'm also trying to share what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience and indeed more meaningful conversations. Which brings us to this week and the 77th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. And I'm delighted to introduce Tom Hirons as our guest. Tom is a poet and storyteller based in Devon in the UK. He is the director of Feral Angels Press and editor of Clarion Poetry magazine. He teaches poetry writing both online and in person and runs poetry-focused wilderness fasts. Tom's piece, Sometimes a Wild God, is a subcultural poetry classic, and it was how I came into contact with his work. As he puts it, he has never won a poetry prize or been published in a poetry magazine, yet he still makes his living from poetry. He says, I have heard all the terrible news and I've looked into the inferno of the future, but I am still in love with this life. While Tom's latest collection, The Queen of Heaven, is out this week. In this glorious conversation, Tom shares his journey of becoming a poet and realizing how he can best apply his abilities in this world. We discuss tracking life and threads from other worlds. We muse on balancing our ascending into spirit and our descending into soul, while acknowledging the beauty that can be lost if we're trying too hard. He also notes the significance of wilderness fasting in terms of initiation into adulthood and in knowing and living out his true nature and soul image. If you have this gnawing feeling or even aching sense that there is so much more to this life that you are presently aware of or that you are accepting of, this conversation will point to and suggest where to explore, what there is to discover, and what life can feel like from there. Look, I enjoyed the hell out of this conversation. I found Tom to be a well of wisdom in terms of this path that many of you may be embarking upon in terms of trying to live out our soul image. And so I suspect that you're going to take a lot from this conversation. And if you do enjoy this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're on the podcasting platforms, please continue to leave your lovely reviews, as I greatly appreciate your support at this stage of my podcasting journey. You can check out the show notes below to explore more of Tom's work with the various links that I've provided. Well, you can also check out the link to the What is a Good Life newsletter that accompanies this podcast and shares my insights and reflections on what these conversations that you're listening to have evoked in me. So that's all I have for you this week. I look forward to carrying on the conversation with you next week. And so without further ado, the 77th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Tom, look, thank you so much for joining me on the What is a Good Life podcast today. Having just shown you here, Sometimes a Wild God was a gift. It was gifted to me by a dear friend of mine. And I just thought it was absolutely delicious. And I've gone on to check out more of your work. So I'm really grateful to have you here today.
Oh, it's lovely to be here, Mark. And I'm glad that the book found its way to you. The book leads, or the poem leads, and I just really follow on, kind of limping behind it, finding out where it takes me in life. It's like a strange passport or a visa, you know.
Clutching onto a piece of fur and a knife on a floor. Sorry,
Exactly.
That's a line from the poem, in case anyone isn't aware of it. But look, Tom, the question I kick this off with is the question of, is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through life?
That's a big question, Mark? And to kind of drop back a bit, I guess, there's always a big question, and it changes, or the flavor of it changes. I suspect that the question that I'm trying to answer, or that I'm involved with, grappling with, entangled with, is something that it's difficult to put language to. So I think at different times, different forms emerge to answer that question, you know, or the shape of the question changes as time goes on, but it all seems to have a particular kind of flavor. But I'm not even going to attempt to answer the question. really in words, but I can give you a glimpse of what I'm grappling with at the moment, and maybe that'll kind of shed some light on what the question behind the question, and the question behind the question, and behind the question, until we get to the last visible question. So I'm a poet, which is always a kind of bold statement to make, but it seems to be true, both on an outer level of, I make my living from writing and teaching poetry largely, which is extraordinary to me, and a fact that I try and send back in time as much as I can to my younger selves living in shitty flats in Edinburgh and caravans in the hedge and everything, trying to write and thinking, what does success even look like? What does being validated as a writer, what is this thing that I'm trying to do? Why am I making life so hard for myself? I try and send my life now back to them. And whilst it's certainly not a comfortable life, it's a lot more comfortable than it was then. So there's this thing, I'm a poet. I make my living that way. And in the outer world, that seems to be true, an extraordinary thing. And in my inner world, ever since I started writing poetry seriously, which was about 20 years ago now. Yeah, because I didn't grow up particularly with poetry, grew up with a lot of stories, but not so much poetry, and didn't consider myself a writer of poetry at all until I did my first wilderness fast in Wales back in, I think it was 2004, and understood what who I was to a certain degree. And it was quite a surprise to me in some ways to find out that poetry was a big part of that, a huge part of that. But as a poet, so that's just to give the inner and the outer kind of context for that. As a poet, my primary grapple at the moment is, given all the possibilities that we can experience or imagine with what language can do, what is the best that I can do with what I have, the skills I have now, and the skills I might discover and develop to essentially lend the best weight in what I call the ongoing war against the devourer. Yeah. And I'm not going to try and define that. And it means different things to different people. But I have a strong sense that the way we use language, whether it's in art, um, fiction, poetry, all the possibilities, or in our everyday speech, or in the statements we make, the questions we ask, the form we put in our breath and sound to these inner things. The possibilities are wider than I can imagine of how that might affect the world. So we have a kind of scientific sense, a kind of rational sense, age of reason sense of what language can do in terms of rhetoric and so on, how we can, use language to persuade, to enlighten, to shed light on things, to convey the shape of our inner world, and to kind of bring some light to the outer world. And then there's this whole other aspect of language, which, I encounter much more in both kind of ancient senses of what poets could do, but also every so often in the conception of storytelling that I come across in, kind of particular indigenous cultures. Yeah, the way that storytelling is used, for example, as a way of pacifying the weather. Yeah, or of affecting external reality in particular powerful and what we would call magical ways. Yeah. And in terms of the old traditions of, this place, the island of Britain, or in Ireland, or everywhere that I have actually come across, there's this tradition of, or mention of, people who use language in ways that are both powerful, sometimes terrifying, sometimes beneficial. And that use of language in that powerful way is something that we only experience a few times in our life if we're lucky at the moment. And that's the thing that I'm interested in at the moment, particularly. Yeah. How can I develop what I do so that it has more beneficial effect in the world? Yeah, harken back to that ongoing battle that I speak about. That's a very long-winded way of pointing to the question.
To be honest, after listening to it for a couple of minutes, I was just thinking of what will be my next question. It will be, can you just say more words? This sounds absolutely lovely. so, so maybe just an hour of you riffing on what you've just said there would be, to yourself, would be delightful. I really enjoyed that. I guess I have a bunch of questions, but in what sense, like, can you give me an insight into what some of those experiences have been like when when you've had that almost, I don't want to use the word transcendent too loosely or even just too fixedly or firmly in labeling something, but I don't know, it just
Mm-hmm.
seemed like there was a coalescing of something beyond words, logic, experience, influence, connection, impact, a whole series of things. Like, can you describe
For
what
sure.
like, or even think of a moment like that?
Yeah, I mean, hmm, without wanting to necessarily get too specific, I guess what I'm talking about is I think we've all had the experience, or most people I know anyway, and maybe this is a criteria of how I choose my friends. We've all kind of had the experience of reading a book or hearing a piece of poetry or being in a theater or a cinema, or watching TV and having this kind of ignition of synchronicities around the experience of watching or receiving or reading this text, these words, this artifact that has been created. Sometimes that coincides with or takes the form of reading a book and having a sense that it's being written as you read it. Have you ever had that?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you turn the
That's a
pages,
beautiful way of putting
and
it.
yeah, it's like, okay, this I'm not making contact with something that already exists. It's happening here and now. And you ask a question on one page, and you turn the page, and it's, that's addressed on the next page, and then it happens again and again, and you again. Pretty soon, you're like, what the fuck is going on here with this thing that I've got in my hands? And I'm not talking about being high while you're reading something or anything like that. Just certain certain books for me have that quality. They hum and sing, and it feels like there's more going on than just the transmission of information. Essentially, this thread of words. Recently, I've been hanging out a bit more with people involved in chaos magic kind of world, which isn't a world that I'm particularly familiar with in its kind of form. But they have these terms hyperstition and hypersigils, which is the conscious creation of objects that do this kind of thing to people. Um, and I'm starting to get interested in that. It's like, okay, there are things that we can do in the process of creating art, let's call it that, that give it some power beyond it just touching people deeply. And sometimes it happens by accident. So sometimes a wild god has a power that I don't understand. Yeah. It was a lucky it was a lucky moment kind of in the culmination of a few years of paying deep attention to be sitting at my computer, having had a few cans of Guinness, listening to Ukrainian hip hop. And I've been carrying around this first line for a couple of years going, what is this poem? And trying to find it and Google it and, all of this for a couple of years, literally thinking, I'm going to
Yeah.
love this poem. It sounds right up my street. And then turns out it didn't actually exist. So I thought I'd better write it and find out, or rather follow the thread and find out where it already existed and put it down onto paper.
That's
And
such a beautiful metaphor for life. Sorry to briefly interrupt, but just
no,
like,
go for it.
you know, writing, excited to find out what is going to be written. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, just like even start. So even consider starting off maybe with some, I don't, intention would even sound like too strong a word, but just it almost removes you from the place of the creator. Like you know, you're just paying attention or you're observing. Like,
Yeah, but that's the skill, isn't it? I see that, whatever skill I have is largely as a tracker, yeah, on the trail of these things, whatever set of images or formulation we have of that, tracking in the other world or where things kind of come over into this world a bit. I often talk when I'm teaching about the threads that we carry around, which is a bit of a dream or a repetitive part of a song or something that just keeps coming back to us, and then paying attention to that and starting to use what skill we have to follow it so that we follow the true thread rather than making something up. There's a kind of poetry which is fiction. You write down stuff and you create images, and then there's this other kind of poetry which is tracking, which is following something that, as far as I'm concerned, exists in the other world. And what I'm trying to do is lay it down in this world, in the middle world, or the consensual reality, whatever we call it, as a kind of true image of that thing that was glimpsed or experienced in the other world. If that makes any sense at all.
oh, this is invariably when somebody says to me, if that's making any sense at all, it's what's making the most sense. I'm grappling with asking you this question or not, but I hope you take it in the best of intentions.
Are you insane? Have you taken your medication, Tom?
And you've captured, you've had an insight into my morning my morning dialogues with myself. How would you how would you even point to the other world, or even suggest what what the other world may reveal, not consist of, but just in that kind of line? Like, what would you even be pointing to?
I try not to get too defining with it, because
Mm.
then we're kind of caught up in philosophy rather than practice. The way that I have access to what I call the other world, which I guess in largely certainly has a lot of overlap with kind of traditional Celtic notions of the other world that you might find in the Irish cycles, or in the Mabinogi in Wales, and that kind of thing, is is not some other place. Yeah, it coexists with this visible world, and is a vast place, some of which you could call the imaginal. So then there's that overlap between what's going on inside us, in our imaginations, in the movements of our souls and our emotions. Um, that is part of the other world, or at least a threshold to the other world. And then there are these extraordinary places, that people visit in their kind of shamanic experiences and in visions and then dreams. So those experiences that we have are certainly overlapping with the other world, but then it has its own ways, its own kind of consistent laws, I guess, of how it operates. And most of it's completely beyond my understanding and experience, and I just dabble my toes in. And my way of navigating in it, or making contact with it, or speaking about it, is through poetry. That's an unexpected thing to my younger self. When I thought that shamanic drum or taking plants or whatever would be the way that I traversed my quite childish conception of what the other world might be. But it seems that poetry is the way that, for whatever reason, has been laid down for me to move and navigate in that world. It's about as close as I can get.
It almost sounds like a, like with the maturity of your experience of it, or with the maturity that further experiences bring of it, there's a more subtlety, there's a more subtle, I don't want to say entry point because it's existing all the time, but that there's a more subtle interweaving with it, as you continue to track or pay attention, or as you say, pay attention or note its movements or its consistencies, as you put it.
At times, yeah. One of the fascinating things to me about being alive and being human is how much we can forget. We remember things and then we forget. So sometimes I have a subtle appreciation, and sometimes I sink back into a kind of Disneyfied, colonized otherworld sense of the other
Yeah.
world as well. And whenever I wake up from that, it's like, oh my God, how could I have fallen into that particular kind of sleep again? But my practice, such as it is, I don't write every day. I've got two small kids, and my life is, beautiful chaos. And I don't write every day, but that tracking that I was talking about of what's about, that's what I endeavor to cultivate. And so, yeah, a sense of that being the way in, rather than, okay, now I'm doing my other world practice or whatever. Certainly, very different feel to it, very different texture to that relationship.
Just because you mentioned it earlier, I think the term used is wilderness fast. Is that the
Yeah,
is
yeah.
and just what prompted you, or what led you to that being something that attracted you?
Well, for those who don't know, wilderness fast is, at its core, generally tends to be a number of days and nights fasting by yourself in some kind of held container of kind of ceremonial occasion. A few days and nights fasting without food. Sometimes people do it without water, but I'm not really into that. That was, yeah, so 20 years ago. I was living in Edinburgh. I'm 51 now, 31 then, 30 then, or whatever. And I was hanging out at the local shamanic center, the Edinburgh Shamanic Center, and I was getting involved in all kinds of stuff there, and I was having a great time doing lots of drumming and praying and kind of intuitive stuff, and very well intentioned endeavors towards bringing some sense of the sacred and some contact with this other world to the center of my life. In actuality, what I was doing was kind of undergoing an apprenticeship to become the worst kind of plastic shaman you can imagine, you know. And I was getting ready to be really good at it because I've got a bit of a silver tongue and a bit of charisma. I know the language. I can play that quite well, and that was all going very nicely. And then this guy came to the center on a visit. A guy called David Wendelbury, who said he was running vision quests in Wales, and there was all sorts of parts of me leapt at this because I was craving that kind of missed initiation into adulthood that I'd always, or for a long time, I'd had a strong sense of, there's something missing here. In actual fact, it was just the acknowledgement that I was still emotionally and spiritually a complete child, even at the age of 31. But there was a sense of some deep longing were leapt towards this. And there's a really long story about this, but I'm going to keep it quite short. So eventually I went down to Wales, and I took the whole thing very, very seriously. Approached it as if I was about to undergo some kind of symbolic death, which is totally appropriate. It was a big deal, and my soul was really, really into this. As a transition point in my life, and I was expecting it to be some very beautiful transcendent experience where maybe I would be handed my life's purpose on some kind of scroll from the clouds, wrestle angels, probably come out with a new name, something not too grand, but kind of secretly quite grand. Kind of
Yeah,
I don't know,
grand enough for people to pay attention, right?
yeah, exactly. Broken blackbird or something. Nothing, kind of appropriately humble brag, humble. So I thought it was going to be great. Anyway, it was fucking horrible. It was absolutely just horrible experience. It rained all the time, and the place that I was fasting in stank of death. And instead of coming out feeling like I'd been sitting on a mountaintop looking at, infinity, I came out feeling like I'd been had my, head in the Morrigan's crotch for a good few years. And it completely turned me upside down. And having been kind of quite ascendant kind of spirit boy without my feet on the ground at all, it turned me upside down and began this kind of descent into soul, into writing poetry, and away from basically trying to escape the fact of my existence on Earth through soaring upwards. So it's a horrible thing, and now I run them for other people, but I try and persuade people not to do it because it's a ghastly experience.
But I think you could have made an amazing plastic shaman. By the way, like I could,
would have been so good.
You would have been really, really good, man.
I'd have such a cult.
Oh yeah, like definitely. You've got
my soul would be screaming, but
but that would only fuel your work as a plastic shaman. Like you could project it elsewhere, right?
I know, until it all came kind of crashing down in some terrible transgression and abuse of power, and then there would be the TV rights to the documentary about it.
Yeah. But I love this. I recently interviewed a guy, Parker Palmer, who wrote a book, Let Your Life Speak, and he talks about depression almost being the friend that, like, instead of viewing it as something that pushes us down, is almost guides us down to the ground, like like shows us that the ground is safe to walk on.
It can do for sure.
Oh yeah. There's many caveats I could put to that sentence, which he did, I think, at the time. But
always caveats to every sentence. Yeah,
absolutely. So but this idea of the descent, what gave you? I don't even want to say comfort, but what allowed you to follow that thread? Like, you're talking about very ascendant, because I think this is a hugely important part, and I think this is where I think, without generalizing too much, but most people on some sort of spiritual path are in this, and they remain in the like the focus just purely being on the ascendant, and it really muddies the waters quite a lot, I think. What's your perspective just on what made you curious enough or open enough to follow that?
Well, with the caveat or extra piece that I also know a lot of people who are entangled in the world of soul to such a degree that they have kind of lost sight of the infinite as well. Yeah, so the soul's world can be just as seductive and stickier in a way. It's labyrinthine and boggy, much more kind of familiar to us from these islands in its feel than the kind of the bright light of the eternal infinite and all of that. So just to say that, but I don't know the answer to that, except that this experience of the wilderness fast literally did just turn me upside down and gave me no choice. Yeah, it was literally, this is what is happening. This is where you're going, and this thing, poetry and storytelling as well, to a degree, this has the language, the way of using language that will both allow you to express some of the experiences and kind of nature of the landscape that you're in, but also will be your tool for moving through it. Yeah. So rather than it being a conscious choice, I guess there was a certain amount of faith that I wasn't just going to be completely crushed into a little cube of carbon, which is always the fear when you're undergoing the compression of soul's world stuff, especially after the weightlessness of kind of spirit world. It was more like the fast was the technology that allowed the rebalancing to start to occur. Yeah, if that makes sense. So I again, like I was saying to you earlier with the poem, sometimes a wild god, in the sense of just tagging along behind, kind of clinging on by my fingernails. That's generally my experience of life. Whether it's with that or with what's happening in my inner world and that kind of thing. But I guess some part of me must have had some kind of faith.
By the way, I love this these balancing comments on soul. I've never actually heard it put that way, but I think it's really important what you said there.
I I am I believe in it. And this is actually something that came out of the Wilderness Fast work as well, a different kind of map actually uh, you know, of reality, self, exterior world, a much more, circular whole map than, the fragments or just complete fictions that we're passed down, our kind of cultural inheritance, which is a weird bag of broken mirrors to carry around and trying to make any sense out of at all, really, isn't it? So yeah, I think that was one of the things that I got from doing the fast in the first place, was this sense of like, yeah, soul, spirit, uh, not the same, very different qualities that exist, kind of not just on the ends of one spectrum, but a part of a circular thing that also has another axis going on of kind of more like body and mind as well.
The sense you mentioned of just the like seeing the need for initiation. Um, I know a lot of 60 and 70-year-olds and 50-year-olds that I still don't think as are adults. Same as 40s, 30s. There's no discrimination, I think, in that.
Mm-hmm.
The sense for you of even just an observation of it being like we lack initiation almost from childhood into to adulthood. What was that realization like for you, and kind of how did that take shape? And even just you're alluding to even holding some of these wilderness fasts as well.
That's a big question. I mean, the whole notion of adulthood, adolescence, childhood, elderhood, and where we're at in our particular pieces of these societies, that's hours of conversation, and I don't have anything kind of small to offer to that. Whenever I look back on my life so far, it always seems to me that, up until like 3 years ago, wherever I'm at, uh, I was still an adolescent, and I know I'm still mostly an adolescent. Some part of me got initiated in that process, um, but I was aware from a pretty young age that there were things people did in other cultures to not only to mark transitions, but to make those transitions happen properly. Um, so the wilderness fast in the way it's done in particular places, the Vision Quest style of thing, um, or other rites of passage that exist and have existed all over the world, um, I was aware of them, and increasingly aware the older I got. It was just, although society tries to kind of, not consciously, tries to keep us in a kind of sleep and make us not aware that we're all going around as crazy orphans. That's what we're doing. Yeah. And that seems to be working really well for us all. um, and that's why the world is in such great health. Um, but yeah, there was some part of me nagging away, going, but where's that thing? Where's that thing? Where was I pictured it in my kind of Disneyfied version, as an event that would make me into an adult, and had no sophisticated notion at all of how complicated and multifaceted and multi-threaded, that process might be, and what even does adulthood mean in a society that doesn't have any real kind of place for adults, let alone elders. Everyone wants to be an elder these days. And I think it was Bill Plotkin in one of his books, tries to kind of persuade us to try and become adults first before we leap to becoming elders. If we're lucky, we might come across a couple of those in our life, but certainly not guaranteed. But have you ever done anything along those lines?
I've like I guess ceremonies with ayahuasca. Then I do a lot of just my own mad experiments, like never having taken psilocybin. So this isn't a recommendation to anyone taking a heroic dose, as Terence McKenna would call it, and locking myself in a dark room with no light or music or distractions, and just to see what happens. Some of it has intention, some of it's just I think a desire to relinquish any kind of sense of control or self.
Mm-hmm.
And so psilocybin is something that I just do with myself in probably every 12 to 18 months. I fasted for a week before, not the same as what you're talking now. I drank water, but also not in the wilderness. But once again, really I was really intrigued to see what I'm fascinated as to what I can perceive of myself if I subtract things from my life, or just even put myself in an altered state of consciousness, I guess, like or even just to develop a subtlety to my appreciation or my observing. You mentioned tracking, like, so I initially got very regimented. I was laughing at when you said plastic shaman, because I just had a conversation with someone earlier where I referenced how when I started meditating, I'd almost start meditating in public places, in a way that I may as well have just wore a sign saying I'm a meditator.
Performance meditation is a fantastic hobby.
I was unbelievable at it. Like departure lounges of airports, or even on airplanes was probably my main stage. But yeah, so I started, I think, approaching a lot of this with a lot of the same mindset of like, I'm going to try and get some sort of enlightenment here, or the same mindset as to how I was approaching my life before. Now, deliberate or fixed processes would be less about it, and it's more just paying attention to life. And that can come in many ways. Like, I have a 10-month-old daughter now, so sometimes I'll just lay with her while she's laying on my chest, and I don't know when she's going to wake up. And I don't have a phone near me. I don't have a book near me. I have nothing.
and you can't move.
Yeah. But that there's like I could put her on the bed beside me, but I don't know. I like just experiences where I'm saying I don't know where this goes. Or when I lived in Peru for the year, when I mentioned that to you, there was a dog's next door neighbor I used to be afraid of dogs, and this guy turned out to be an alpha dog, and I'd see him fighting and everything else. So, but we struck up this love or this bond between us where he'd start going off when we go for a walk, because he knew the countryside there. He'd just take off wherever, and sometimes he could take me on a casual stroll, and other times into other neighboring towns where there's dogs attacking him, and we're running over fields and he's messing around with bulls or cows, and I'm trying to get out of the field before they chase me as his sidekick. And so I don't know, I guess I'm saying all that just to say, like, I think life or paying attention to life, and like you said as well, like, while fluctuating in and out of that, and even sometimes holding them both at the same time. Like, I'm perplexed at the moment. I don't carry my phone around with me, but my laptop can get my attention. I'm perplexed that I could spend an hour just sitting on a bench and then still, watch too much YouTube in the same night. So sometimes it's not even demarcated by, I'm in a very contemplative phase these months. It's even different parts of a day. But I guess just being curious about that as well. Like I think everything offers
Mm.
up the experience. If there's some degree of awareness to go, how interesting, even when
Yeah.
I may be doing something that somebody else could perceive to be the most, in air quotes, unconscious action or act, if you know what I mean.
Completely. I'm all in favor of those, unsacred times as well.
Yeah,
Sometimes you just need to sit in your pants and eat ice cream or whatever your equivalent is. But I have this thing where, uh, especially if I'm working on a poem that's really, fucking me up, and just I can't find my way through or round, or I've lost the thread, or just I'm grappling with it, and a time when I'm deeply involved in it, I'll watch old recordings of international rugby games from the
right,
90s, and some of these I've watched like 20 times now,
right.
and I'll watch them, especially Ireland and New Zealand games.
From
Uh,
the 90s.
um,
So you just hate
yeah,
Ireland.
no, I love watching Ireland, but oh yeah, I mean Ireland more
it,
recently. I'll watch some of
yeah,
theirs as well.
yeah. In the
Yeah,
90s, Ireland against New Zealand, you just like to see Ireland being bludgeoned.
yeah.
And you're from Britain. Like, come on, man.
I know.
Have you not
Okay,
done enough?
we could talk about the my complex relationship with Englishness.
You're
Um,
right.
yeah. I think it's fair to say I have never supported the English rugby team. I do,
I've taken you off track though. I do want to hear more though, just about the significance of just watching these reruns again, because I think there's you're saying
totally.
something that resonates.
Okay, so something happens there where you know how it is when your mind is too fixed and too tight. Yeah, you've gone into that kind of tight beam focus on something, which is extraordinary and solves all sorts of things and explores all sorts of territories. But it's one of many modes that we can have of engaging with reality. Uh, Sometimes what's needed, it's like undoing a knot. You pull and you pull and you pull, and sometimes that works. Sometimes you get the USB cable out of the tangle of cables, but most of the time, what you need to do is take a deep breath, soften, and just kind of let it come out of its own accord, whilst maintaining a little bit of attention. It's kind of like that a bit, putting the thing I'm working on to one side, and rugby, for example, has this particular kind of kinesthetic quality to me, to watching it. So I'm fully involved, and my body's twitching about, and I'm getting really excited, and kind of the joy and disaster of it all. And then 30 minutes into a match, boom, the line that I'm working on, or the particular energetic structure that I'm trying to do something with in the poem resolves itself. And I'm like, okay. And if I'm doing my work well, then I'll pause the game and I'll go back to the work I'm doing. If it's a really good game, then I'll just carry on watching the game and completely forget the amazing, beautiful, poetic thing that happened, in favor of watching men just ram into each other in the mud. That happens as well. So, but what I'm saying is something needs to relax. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's that, I'm one of my big things in writing poetry, and what I teach in composition and in editing is a thing I call the tides, but it's really a kind of bellows movement, where you move from one end of a pole, duality, to the other, and then back again and back again. So that might be like self and other, might be present, past, inner, outer, large, small, literal, metaphoric, spirit, soul, sacred, profane, all these, apparent dichotomies. Something happens to me when I encounter poetry, and most things in life, actually, and kind of including people, where there's a movement between the two. Yeah. And so that tightness and looseness is another kind of bellows motion that seems to need, for my work to flourish, that it needs to be an active thing. Something in my heart, something in the universe seems to have a sympathy for that bellows motion. And so doing that in writing is quite fun when you consciously set up, say, 3 of these tides, work in a piece, so that there's this kind of movement going on in three kind of dimensions, as well as whatever narrative thing is happening, or whatever soul or spirit kind of deepening or ascending is going on. That's where I get my kicks.
Well, to be honest, that just sounds utterly beautiful, and I think that there's, I don't know, a real. I'm not going to say focus because I'm not focusing on it, but maybe even a realization is a particularly important one for me. I think is the idea of not trying to perfect my, and I I can't perfect my, there's not, I am perfect. Do you know what I mean? Like just in whatever way it is. So not falling into this trap of thinking I have to do things to derive a certain outcome. Like the truth is that I don't
Ah,
know. And my bigger interest is what, when I feel like I'm in my natural state, um, whatever that is. And, I had an experience recently where I had an engagement with a group of people, and I was kind of doing this thing that I sometimes do. I was judging someone in the group, and I was getting into some arguments, and in my head I was thinking about picking out their contradictions and everything else, just to show them that
excellent.
I know a thing or two
Yeah,
more
yeah,
than them, right?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
of course there was an idea came up to me like, oh, I have to let go of this. This is there, you can open your heart more or something, something like this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And what I've been finding more interesting of late is like, no, this is naturally how I react. I could project some anger out. I could project some anger in, and this will move. This will pass. Like, and not in a trite way of trying to silver line a cloud or something. Of this too shall pass. So therefore, don't worry about it. No, like feel it all. And
mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm,
think so much of life, we're almost standing in the way of a steamroller that's coming our way. And it's slowly and inevitable coming our way. But like you say there, like you could sit at the desk saying, no, I must write this poem, and
mm-hmm.
just remain in that tension for much longer than we need to. There's something about this life, I think, that we can let go of a little bit more, or trust a little bit more, or even just in paying attention to the ebbs and flows and the toings and froings of our nature, that we can just trust that this is just, it's happening as it needs to happen, or it's okay as it is.
And absolutely, and even if it's not okay as it is,
Yeah,
um, if we try, if we're trying too hard, and sometimes we have to try too hard as well. It's kind of layer upon
that's
layer upon
that's
layer.
part of it too,
But but
right?
but if we're trying too hard, something is lost, and the thing that is lost is so beautiful and so vital and just precious to me, that I would rather live in the total fucking chaos and mess of, um, you know, splashing around and finding out, than join the world of control freakery, essentially, which is, all around us in kind of the circles that I imagine we overlap in. Uh, and it's something that I feel Britain and Ireland, yeah, it's kind of in our nature to be in that mess. We're good at being in that mess, yeah. Whether it's just kind of worshipping good crack as having something holy about it, or just the fact that our weather systems are just constant chaos. We live in a mess of uncertainty, and that seems to give the way we go about things sometimes a certain quality, which I see, say, North American, spirituality world, just to make a really broad brushstroke. I see them craving that, as just like some essential muscle relaxing and going, here we are, here we are. Let's find out what happens if things get messy, if things aren't done by the book, if we don't follow the straight line path. We're good at the kind of the sideways approach to things. And I'm not talking about being kind of circumspect in our speaking, but the way that we kind of all know that metaphor is the right way to speak about certain things, and the I don't know, the glory of the mess is the shortest I can put it.
What do you think? Even that acknowledgement that I'd rather just live in the uncertain, messy chaos than approach life another way. What do you think? Almost like that last inch of your being, it sounds like that's almost like non-negotiable. To like, it almost sounds like a connection to aliveness or something of this
Yeah.
sense. Like, what would you perceive that to be?
Um, there's a way of speaking where we try and pin a word or a group of words onto something so that we all know what we're talking about. And recently, I feel like I've finally come to acknowledging the limitations of that way of speaking and the necessity to sometimes speak about precious things in a way which is more about overlapping a lot of stories and seeing where the common ground is. And there's being something in the center of those, or in the kind of overlapping petals of that flower, that holds the quality of it. So I could say life force, I could say wildness, I could say something to do with authenticity, something to do with just reality. But none of them would capture it, as far as I'm concerned. But that thing, that vital thing, which also includes a lot of things that aren't those words, is the most precious thing in the world to me. And to me, it's like that's where the is.
And I guess just from what you were saying at the start, like that's why it was worth you making your life so hard when maybe
You
starting
could
off
say,
on this.
yeah. And I think I was lucky in a way that I had a very strong. There's this kind of these references in kind of ancient literature to this notion of the daemon, yeah, that Jung and the Jungians picked up as this aspect of our psyche, as they would put it, that holds a strong protective function to our, deepest soul image, and tries its best to create the circumstances in our life that will result in the best kind of fruition, or actualizing of that soul image into who we become. And I think my sense of having that going on, or the way that shaped my life, has been pretty strong from an early age. And I experienced it as a younger person, in my teens and my 20s, as an almost annihilatory force. I came close to suicide several times, like many of us in teens and early 20s, just not being able to deal with the intensity of emotional and mental anguish that there was. And part of that was this strong sense of what you could do with your life. There's something waiting, and it wasn't happening. So I felt kind of worthless in the face of it. But something happened in my 20s. I made decisions to, follow that soul's calling of writing again and again and again, even when nothing was coming of it, and putting millions of words under my writer's feet, um, that has allowed us to be more in accord. And now I have an easier relationship with it, even though it's as uncompromising as ever. But yeah, It was like someone sitting on my shoulder constantly, just going, "Are you doing it yet? Are you doing it yet? Are you doing it yet?" You know. So yeah. Eventually, it was like, okay, I'll get on with it.
That's a it's a glorious kind of image, though, of like what, or a sense of what can happen if like that gift being a curse, if not if we're not listening or talking or engage or communicating with it or coming into contact with it in some way.
And absolutely, and the without getting too caught up in kind of contemporary language for it, I'm also aware that it's a total privilege to have the circumstances in our lives to be able to turn towards it.
Completely, yeah.
For most people, there I think there is that, there's the daemon or whatever we want to call it. There's that inner calling, and there's definitely the soul image. Everyone has one, that sense of just who you fucking are on this earth. But most of us don't get a chance in hell of making contact with that or experiencing it as anything other than this constant background existential shame uh, about the gulf between that image and what we're actually doing in our lives, and that's appalling. That's a devastating sadness and a complete failure of society and culture to pay any attention to each person's individual fate, destiny, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, disaster, total disaster.
Just there's one other question I'd like to ask you. If you do you still have time?
I have time for sure.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'd love to.
Just
Go on, hit me. Is it a
before
maths
I,
question? I'm quite good at them.
my mum was a maths teacher, man. You don't want to mess.
Here we go.
with
Here we
that.
go. Here we go then. Complex numbers. I'm your man.
Yeah, the war against the devourer, or even just your observation of pacifying the weather when observing how other like tribes or people from other times or life situations. What is the significance of that to you? I know it may be not something you
Mm-hmm.
want to put fixed language on per se, because I think you're quite clear that that's enough almost.
Uh-huh.
But I do just get a sense that there's some sort of call to action within that too, or
Yeah.
there's some movement to it as well. Like even if it were just like an intention to help people remember, or something of that nature kind of flutters in me when I'm talking about this. Just from your
Yeah.
sense, when you mentioned those earlier, what comes up for you?
Well, off the top of my head, off the top of my heart, I'd say partly there's a cultural thing of this is our birthright
Right.
to 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 at least have the experience of the possibilities of language, of story, poetry, music, having that effect in the world and that being part of our conception of reality. Yeah, there's that, and that I mean, that's a fairly big thing in itself. But mostly it's practical to me. As you don't need me to tell you that we're living in cascading, collapsing disasters. Yeah, and whether we're on the sharp end of that or insulated by the bubbles we live in currently, it is ongoing. And I've got two sons, 5 and 9, and as a human, let alone as a parent, I'm deeply aware that 50 years, 100 years, I can barely imagine what the state of things is going to be like in 6 months, let alone 10 years or 50 or 100 or 1,000, you know. And whilst that has always, to a certain extent, been the case, in particular times, we are facing, yeah, I'm not going to go on about it. We're facing just utter catastrophe, and some people are living in the utter catastrophe. What can we do with that magical capacity of language in the face of that? Yeah. So, on the far end of the spectrum, it's like, what spell can I make to either stop the devouring one in its tracks or awaken something that can stop the devouring one in its tracks? That's an aspiration. Yeah. But at the same time, being aware of my utter tininess, and lack of skill, it's like, well, what good then can I do if I can't do that? Yeah. I'm not saying there isn't good. It's literally what is the best that I can do to, yeah, to slow the advance, to strengthen the resistance against the advance. Yeah. That kind of thing. I think you get my meaning.
No, absolutely, and I think it's yeah, I think that's like a beautiful balance in even just how you've described it, of like, or even an awareness of the situation, but also our role in it, and what we can hope within it, or hold on to within it, or bring into awareness as well. Look, Tom,
Mm-hmm.
throughout the course of this conversation, even the initial question of, what is the best I can do, or that was a question behind all this that we've just kind of even touched on there as well.
Mm-hmm.
The sense of following threads, following tracks, ascending, descending, like a sense of, even then, you've said more recently, of following if it's your daemon. I always mess up that word, and then, but also, just this coming into this authenticity, this aliveness, this wildness, whatever it may be, and then even just the significance of more of us even coming into, or coming through initiations into adulthood, let alone being an elder. I'm just really curious to ask you the question, Tom. What is a good life for you?
What is a good life? What is a good life? Mm. There's so many levels to that, so many parts. As someone who has always been poor, a good life is being able to pay the rent and put food on the table for your kids. There's that. It's simple, but there's so much more, isn't there? For me, a good life. So one of the things that I'm kind of wondering with constantly, in all the questions of what is the best that I can do, what is the place in which I can apply my efforts and my skills to maximum effect to increase the general happiness of the universe, or whatever it might be. I go through cycle upon cycle upon cycle of that question, and different answers come up and different answers come up. But the one that I return to again and again and again is to know the nature of your soul image, and to then live that. Yeah.
So I had to
And
take a
that's,
pause to write that down.
yeah.
That I think that's absolutely gorgeous. I think. Sorry, please carry on.
Well, for me, it's not only what brings us the gift of being in alignment with our own nature, and resolves all manner of neurotic and existential threads of conflict, because we're actually doing what we are. Yeah. But it also seems to be the best answer that I have to that constant question of what should I do? What should I do? in the face of environmental degradation and the desecration of the earth, in terms of Gaza, in terms of Sudan, wherever, all the stuff, or the conflicts in my son's playground, or blah 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 blah, is like, okay, yes, there's right action and kind of all of these kind of codes we could live by, but underneath all that, and probably one of the petals of that flower that I'm talking about, the kind of overlap in territories, one of the key petals of that is, do you know what you're here for, and are you getting on with it? Yeah. And there are a million conversations that come off of that, in terms of how we can bullshit ourselves and how do you really know, and la 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 and all of that. And isn't it just kind of inflated pomposity to have a sense of I am this, and then trying to live by that. All of that's true. All I can speak about is my experience of uh, undergoing that first fast in Wales 20 years ago, coming out the other side, carrying this thing of you are a warrior poet, yeah, or a poet warrior, and going, I don't know what that means, but I also know what that means. Yeah, this is new information, but this is also old information that I'm carrying. What do I do with that? My life as it is now is my best attempt thus far to live that. And I know that when I'm doing that, the way opens, the universe flows, the wind is behind me. And when I'm trying to do something else, mm, you know, everything just kind of stutters and stops and starts. And so I pray for everyone to have that experience in some shape or form, of getting that glimpse of their soul kernel and then getting to live it out. Because it's like, fuck me, that's life in another dimension, and I feel blessed to have had that opportunity.
Uh, Tom, I have nothing further to add to what you've just said there, and I can't think of a better note or point to end this on. But look, thank you so much for joining me here on the What is a Good Life podcast. I've enjoyed this immensely. I think
Me
there's just
too.
so many things you've shared in this that I think are of immense value if people pay attention to it as well. So thank you
Bless you.
very much.
Oh, it's been a total joy, Mark. I could carry on talking with you for hours, and I hope we get the opportunity to do it in person one day, with a walk on the moor, maybe.
Wonderful.